Hello and welcome to the pilot episode of Strange Britain. The aim for each of these episodes is to explore a different strange tale each time. It might be a ghost story, a UFO encounter, some other bit of weird and forgotten history, but all of the stories are said to be true. My name's Adrian Finney and I am an author and a storyteller, and I am the host with the ghosts. Most of you might recognise me from the Strange Sheffield Ghost Tours. I also write books about the paranormal. The Strange Britain series is mine, and I've had a little tiny bit of a lifelong obsession. I remember reading about the Stocksbridge bypass where two police officers saw a ghost back when I was a child, and I was just fascinated. Today though, we're going to have a deep dive into a local legend from the Erdington area of Birmingham. It's a story that revolves around that most ordinary of objects, a phone box, and its connection to an unthinkable tragedy. Birmingham is a city with plenty of weird history of its own. Did you know it's got more miles of canal than Venice? It's also the place that gave us that most English of English takeaway foods, the chicken balti. It's even considered the birthplace of heavy metal music, with bands like Black Sabbath and Judas Priest coming out of Birmingham. It's time for our ghost story. For that, we're going back to 1983. There was no mobile phones, no internet, and culture clubs. Karma Chameleon was the song that was topping the music charts. And if you needed to make a phone call, you had your landline. If you didn't own one, well, you had to head to your nearest iconic red BT telephone box. And that's exactly where Janice was headed. She was a young woman who had some exciting news that she wanted to share. She wanted to tell her husband that she was pregnant. He'd just been stationed away with the armed forces. He'd been home on leave and they'd been trying for a child, and she just got the confirmation that day. The two of them wanted to start a family together, and this was really happy news for Janice. Not having a phone of her own, she decided to head a few minutes walk away to Erdington train station, as she knew there was a red phone box outside. When she reached the phone box, she found another woman was stood outside, and this other woman clearly looked to be in a state of distress. She was wearing a red jumper and looked somehow old-fashioned. Janice, though slightly hesitant to intrude on the woman's personal space, felt compelled to check on her. But as she approached, something truly terrifying happened. The woman beside the phone box appeared to catch fire. She was engulfed by flames. They consumed her, and within seconds, all that was left to even suggest she'd ever been there was a faint wisp of smoke, until that too was carried away on the breeze. It was clear that whoever this woman was, she wasn't human, or at least she wasn't anymore, for Janice was convinced that she'd just seen a ghost. Understandably shaken by her experience, she fled the scene, but that encounter stayed with her for the rest of the day. A few hours later, she rather bravely decided to return to the phone box, and she was determined to find some answers. I have to say she's a lot braver than I would have been in this situation, because I don't think I'd have been so quick to return. She returned and she once again spotted the woman, and this time, amidst this overwhelming sense of sadness that she felt radiating off of her towards her, she heard the woman whisper, and it was the faintest of whispers, "My babies, my babies," until flames once again consumed the poor woman in the red jumper. She began to ask around the area, and she discovered that a lot of other people had also seen her too. One of her neighbours said that about a decade earlier, so back into the early 1970s, she'd seen the woman, and she'd scream when she saw the flames erupted out of the woman, crying for help. There was people all around. She said, "Can you not help this woman? This woman needs our help." Really getting agitated, and she looked around and everybody was like, "Are you okay? You all right, love?" Because they clearly couldn't see this woman in the red jumper, but she knew she'd seen her. Seeing the pity in everybody's eyes who was looking at her, she just kind of meekly went home. When Janice heard this, it didn't give her the comfort that she kind of hoped it might, but at least it showed she wasn't going mad. Seeking answers and not knowing where else to go, given again we are in the pre-internet age, you couldn't just go onto Google and have a little search. She confided her experience in a local priest. He was a family friend, and he was one of those people who was considered a walking encyclopedia of local history. He revealed a heart-wrenching story that had taken place there back in the 1950s. There had been a devastating fire that had taken the lives of a young family. A young woman who'd been working a night shift had arrived home to find that her house was ablaze. She'd ran to that phone box outside Erdington station, hoping to raise the alarm before heading back to the house. When she returned, she found her home completely engulfed in flames. The firemen had arrived on the scene. They'd got there really quickly, and they watched in absolute abject horror. This poor young woman just ran into the flames. Her last words were, my babies, as the flames consumed her. Ultimately, 4 people lost their lives in that fire. The woman in the red jumper, her husband, and their 2 young children. And the tragedy had a really dark effect on the local area. But by the 1980s, when Janice was living there, it had become largely forgotten. The priest believed that the woman in the phone box was somehow this spirit of the grieving mother. She'd been trapped in the final moments of despair, almost like she was reliving them on a loop over and over again. And for years, he'd been trying to see this apparition, because he thought that if he could see her, he could perhaps help her move on to the other side. But he was one of those people who just never could see her. This is something I've found from my own researches. I get a lot of people writing in and telling me their ghost stories. If you're watching that, please do that. strangebritonofficial@gmail.com is my email address. And a lot of people, they fear ridicule is a large part of it. But another part of it is some people see and some don't. And what seems to be the general rule is those who have these encounters wish they'd never had them. Yet you get people who spend their entire lifetimes hoping they'd have a ghostly encounter, and they never do. Back in the 1980s, a bit later on, about 5 years after Janice's sighting, there was a taxi driver. As he pulled up outside Erdington station, he saw the woman in the red jumper too. He heard this faint crackling sound, almost like burning paper. And as he sniffed, he could smell sulphur in the air. And as he watched, horrified, the flames appeared and engulfed this woman in the red. But what he found was interesting was she seemed to be translucent through the whole experience. He could just see straight through her to the phone box behind her. In 1991, there was a group of teenagers hanging around the train station, so they were daring each other to use the haunted phone box, because by that point its reputation was becoming a little bit of an urban legend. One brave, or should I say foolhardy lad, stepped inside and began to dial a number. As he looked at the glass, he saw a reflection looking back at him. He was terrified because the reflection looking back at him was not his own. It was the woman in the red jumper. The receiver then became red hot in his hand. He dropped it to the floor and just ran out of there screaming. His friends looked at him, and as they looked back, they too could see this woman in red in the phone box, again being absolutely consumed by flames. And there's been so many other encounters with this woman over the decades. People seeing her, people feeling helpless. And I find it fascinating, and I also find it fascinating that not everybody seems to be able to see her. There's this idea, you've got stone tape theory, that maybe her sorrow and grief, rather than become lodged to something made of stone, it became lodged into that phone box. In 1994, BT was in a push for modernisation. The classic red phone box was being phased out, and a newer glass and metal design was being phased in. The initial plan was to replace that phone box outside Erdington station, and indeed that phone box was replaced, although not with a new model of phone box. Instead, a rather small, rather modest statue was placed where the phone box once stood. Took that little red phone box away, and abruptly the sighting stopped. Ever since it was taken away, nobody has ever seen the woman in the red jumper. So what was this phantom in the phone box? Is it a restless spirit trapped by her grief? Was it somehow a collective manifestation brought forward by the community, like a physical embodiment of their grief? Is it the stone tape theory? Was it a spirit attached to the phone box itself? We may never know. But all we do know is that those who've had an encounter with her were terrified. As a little final aside, did you know the first red phone box, the K1, appeared in 1921? It was designed by Sir Giles Gilbert Scott, and it was inspired by the mausoleum of architect Sir John Soane, a fact that perhaps makes them a rather suitable home for a ghost. If you like this video, please subscribe and follow me for more. I'm Strange Britain across most social media sites. You can find tickets for my events at strangebritain.eventbrite.com. If you want to support me, coming along to my events is the absolute best way you can do that. I've been Adrian Finney. I want to thank you guys for watching, and please, whatever you do, stay spooky.